So, welcome to Thrones of Britannia, and let's see how this game plays in an online capacity. I've been playing it a little bit, and I have to say I'm liking what I'm playing so far in terms of mechanics. It feels quite pleasant to play in many ways, and I think I'll go into the reasons after the fight. But for here, we have a classic confrontation between the Danelaw Vikings and the Anglo-Saxons from Mercia. So I am playing as Northumbria, or Northumbria, and of course my opponent is playing as Mirtz, or Merc. It's Mercia, essentially. Saying the names in this game is really a nightmare, but nonetheless, we'll go through my army composition first of all, and I do really like the unit models for a lot of these units as well. The only problem with the trees is, of course, it doesn't do the Warhammer sort of removal of the leaves so you can see where your units are, but nonetheless, we soldier on, and I've got a couple of units here of the Jarl's Horsemen. Now, this is not the strongest cavalry that Danelaw can field, but it's basically the same unit, only with a few stats that are slightly lower. It is the Retinue Melee Cavalry Tier 2. Pretty decent, honestly, but primarily for the armour, I have to say, and the shields. It means they're going to be quite resilient in a sustained fight and against arrows, and really cavalry is not a tour de force that you can rely on winning the battle in most cases. You might be able to do so with the Normans and the Welsh factions with their more heavily armoured mailed cavalry. But for here, the cavalry is really for chasing down archers, and cavalry influences the battle, but it doesn't decide the battle now. So it is still very worthwhile bringing them though. Meanwhile, if we look back here, hidden in the ground, we can see that I've got a couple of units of the Northumbrian mailed Thanes, if I just sort of get to a place where they're not being covered by the bushes. And you can see that Northumbria and Mercia actually are two factions which have some unique spearmen to them, so they have some unique units they can bring to bear, and the Northumbrian mailed Thanes are the strongest spears that Northumbria can bring. Tier 3 retinue spear infantry, so I'm expecting good things from them, honestly. But back here we have what I'm hoping to do the vast majority of the damage on both flanks. I've got two units of Berserkers, one on either side. Of course, the Berserkers, they have the rampage mechanic that was in Total War for the Lizardmen, so when they're engaged in battle, it won't take too much for them to go berserk and then you lose control of them, but they do get several things which are very good about them to compensate for that. One is that they are damn near unbreakable because they go berserk and then they just keep fighting until the death. The other is that they inspire fear in nearby units. Of course they would when you've got a rampaging lunatic coming towards you who shows no sign of slowing down. You'll probably be a little bit scared as well. And also they have the highest melee skill of any unit in the Danelaw roster anyway. So in terms of damage and in terms of a sustained combat unit, they are the strongest that I can bring to bear. Meanwhile, if we have a look down here, we can see that my front line consists of these lads over here. We have a lot of the Northumbrian, the Danelaw, I should say, mailed swordsmen. So if I go into cinematic mode here, they're pretty decent. They're not going to be a match for any of the Saxon swordsmen, unfortunately for me, but they should still hold reasonably well because of their armour values. So I'm hoping to hold the centre and then really do some damage on the flanks. If we look here at the front, we can see that I've got, I think, 4 units of just standard Danelaw archers. This is where I've saved some money, to be honest with you. They're not the strongest archer I can field, but they are at least tier 3 levy units, so they're essentially the best low tier archers that I can field. And, you know, they should do okay. I mean, archers, again, in a similar vein to cavalry, you're very rarely going to be seeing battles won with pure skirmishers. They're just there to influence the infantry fight, which is what is going to really carry the day. And then back here, of course, we've seen these guys before. The Danelaw Huskarls, the joint strongest shock infantry unit in the game, and hopefully I'm going to be able to do some damage with them. And if I can back up my swordsmen with the Danelaw Huskarls, I was hoping that I could effect some sort of advance there, and hopefully that would equalise the fight against the superior Saxon swordsman across the field from me. And then over here we can see my general's bodyguard is a unit of the Royal Huskarls, and you know, there are less men in the general's unit, but there are still 75 very strong Huskarl units here, and of course very similar in many ways to the Danelaw Huskarls, only my general, of course, has, I think, the rally ability. We might be seeing that at some point in the battle. And then over on the other side again, more Jarl's Horsemen, mailed Thanes, and Berserkers. Now let's head back over to the other side of the field. I've just clipped through the floor. Many apologies, just a few issues there with the debug camera. But nonetheless, we have some Thane Spearmen here. So they're Retinue Spear Infantry Tier 1, so slightly lower tier spears than I have brought. But still, the Mercian Spears should do a decent job at holding some of my units at bay, even if they don't win. If they can hold my Berserkers in place for long enough, they might be able to shoot them to death. We've got the Royal Huskarls, of course, which in terms of stats are functionally exactly the same as my Danelaw Huskarls, only they are slightly cheaper. And he has brought 3 Huskarl units rather than just my 2 plus my general. So he does outnumber me in terms of shock infantry here, which is going to be interesting to see whether that makes a big difference on proceedings. Here at the front we can see some militia feared archers, so of course the part-time soldiery, and they are essentially going to be exactly the same tier of archer, tier 3 levy units as the archers that I've brought, and he has also brought 4 of them, so great minds think alike. And so the skirmish fight is likely to just be cancelled out one to the other, so again the infantry is going to really be the thing which decides this fight. And unfortunately for me, he does have the swordsman advantage quite clearly, because he's got these Royal Thanes on the front line, elite sword infantry. They have actually less armour than my Danelaw mailed swordsman, but in every other capacity they are superior infantry. They've got more melee skill, more melee damage, and they've got a bigger shield bonus. And I think they've got more morale as well. So if we go into cinematic mode, you can see here that obviously the Saxon unit's looking very fine indeed. I do love the unit models. They've done a really good job with them, I think. And over here we can see the Royal Bodyguard. So he's actually opted to not go for the Huskar Bodyguard unit. Instead, he's gone for the Swordsman. Actually, I think the Saxon forces actually don't get Huskars as their bodyguard, but he does have the stronger sword and shield bodyguard of the 2 that he has available. Elite sword infantry, of course. They're going to be very resilient. More resilient than mine, but they will do less damage than my Royal Huskar unit. Out here on the flank he's got more militia spears, actually no, more Thane spearmen I should say. And over on this flank he's also got 2 units of cavalry, so he's gone for mailed horsemen, which I think, indeed, retinue melee cavalry tier 3, so this is among the strongest cavalry that the Saxons can field. He probably has a narrow advantage over me in terms of the cavalry in this battle, because he does have 3 units of them. He's got 2 over here and then he's got 1 on the other flank, so he's got more cavalry, so he does have a mobility advantage. But without further ado, let's begin. So the infantry is really what's going to be deciding this fight for the most part. If we have a look over here, we can also see the Royal Thanes are really going to afford my opponent a big advantage in the centre, because my mailed swordsmen will not be able to beat them. They should be able to take a bit of a toll on them, however, and I'm hoping that I can then get around the flank with my Huskars and with my Berserkers, and then my spears can hold the flank and my horses can just sort of hold their horses off, while my archers just sort of shoot at what they can. So after a period of us looking at each of our units, having a look down through the new unit models, the archers are of course going to move up first and engage in a bit of a skirmish fight, which ultimately is not really going to go in favour of either one of us, because we've got exactly the same tier of archer and any differences are going to be extremely negligible. I'm pushing up on both flanks, so I think I'm just going to stay in cinematic mode for this fight, to be honest with you. Get rid of all of the stuff, so you can see that I do have a spear advantage, which I'm hoping will be quite significant. So you can see here my mailed Northumbrian spearman moving up to guard the flanks, and considering the fact that he's brought more cavalry, the fact that I've got quality spears is going to be a bit of a boon for me, I think. Got my Huskars as well, and my Berserkers. That's the saving grace for my front line, really, because while my swordsmen, they're good, but they're obviously no match for the Saxon swords. My Berserkers, I'm hoping, will be the thing to really equalise that, in addition to my Huskars, because the Berserkers should be able to do tons of damage if I can get into the side of his front line. So you can see that it is still a bit of a cagey opening affair. You can see that the archers are moving up. I'm also moving forward my front line with my mailed swordsman, just sort of shunting forwards a little bit, and I think this is going to be the first engagement. So the arrows go flying, the archers of Danelaw and the archers of Mercia clashing. It's a good thing we've got 2 very different colour schemes, red and blue. But now you can see that the horses are coming forward, so my opponent is trying to aggressively crush my 1 unit of cavalry as they charge into one another. My Jarl's horsemen are outnumbered and they would lose under normal circumstances to these mailed Saxon cavalry units, but unfortunately for him I do have these spearmen on hand, and these Northumbrian mailed spears are going to be able to do a lot of damage. Someone's routing. I think that's actually one of my archer units that he was focusing down. You can actually see that I'm actually pushing these spears over here to prevent my opponent from being able to reinforce his cavalry with his own spearmen, while my other unit of spears does some severe damage to his cavalry. So if we have a look again, you can see that his cavalry is now retreating. They've sustained a lot of casualties, and now I'm forming up a front line over here on the flank with my spearman. He's got his other units of spears over here, and you can see that I'm now actually moving forward on this side with a unit of my Danelaw Huskarls. So my Danelaw Huskarls are in wedge formation. I'm going to charge them into these spears, and then I'm going to back them up with the Berserkers. Here come the Huskars in wedge. This of course will dramatically lower their melee effectiveness in a sustained fight, but charging into wedge into those spears should do a significant amount of damage to them. Big charge there, and now down the line you can see that the clash of the swordsmen is on, and the Saxons should be able to overpower my infantry in the middle if I'm not able to reinforce them. You can see over here these archers are over here as well, but now I'm also pushing up my spears on the other side, so my opponent is forming up his own spearmen. His Royal Hussars are coming over here, and his Hussars are in a big blob, and they're going to do a ton of damage over here. I do have my own Hussars though in answer to that, but he does drastically outnumber me. Over here we've got my mailed swordsman as well, but I'm going to need to reinforce this section of the line, otherwise his Hussars are just going to roll over my spears. But fortunately for me, I do have my Berserkers coming into battle, and with the Berserkers coming in as they go charge into battle like madmen, the Berserkers should be able to do a decent amount of damage. The cavalry fight has not really gone in anyone's favour, which is good for me because I invested less in my cavalry, so if I can equalise that fight, that's going to be good for me. You can see that my enemy did try and charge into my axemen over here, but ultimately my archers are just doing their best to try and spray down his cavalry. You can see the Berserkers, I've lost control of them already, they're rampaging, and they're just charging after units that are routing, which is unfortunate. I could do with them getting into the archers over here, but as long as they're doing something and not routing, I'm happy with that. But you can see over here the superiority of the Royal Thanes in compared to the Danelaw mailed swordsmen. Really starting to struggle here. My archers are also going crazy and getting too close to the front lines. So my opponent is winning pretty handily in the middle. Even my Royal Hussars were not really enough to slow the tide of the superior Saxon swordsman over here. And then if we have a look, we can see that his Royal Hussars are also starting to break through my lines in several places. My Danelaw mailed swordsman just no match for the professional Saxon units on multiple fronts. But you can see over here, on both flanks where my spears were, my Northumbrian mailed Thanes, I'm winning pretty handily on this flank, and I'm also winning on the other flank as well. So the flanks are going in my favour, but the middle is very severely going in favour of my opponent. But you can see that his spears, he skimped a little bit more on his spears than I did. My Northumbrian mailed spears significantly stronger than his. And also when they're backed up by my Danelaw Hussars, that's a recipe for disaster for the Saxon spearmen over here. As they come in, more spears returning to the fight, but they're not going to get very far against my Danelaw Hussars. Meanwhile, where did my Berserkers go? My Berserkers are over there. They've gained a silver chevron in this fight, so they've done a lot of damage. But you can see here in the middle I'm really starting to struggle. I'm sort of pulling my archers back, trying to get good shots on them as they break through, but my mailed swordsmen are just losing so handily to the Royal Thanes. They have got some kills though. The Royal Thanes have not got through here for free, but it is still a pretty significant victory for Mercia here in the middle. What's going on over here? I think these are Berserkers over here. Indeed they are. Berserkers charging in to the Saxon archers, trying to destroy them. If I can take away my opponent's range, then I should have the ranged advantage in the late game, which I might need considering the way this fight is going. But I am winning over here as well. So these Northumbrian mailed spears slowly but surely hacking their way through the Thane spearmen. Combat is even, but I do have more numbers over here. So eventually I will win, but not many of my spears will be left standing either. If you have a look over here, the Royal Thanes coming backwards to finish off this unit of Berserkers. The Berserkers have done a ton of damage where they are. My enemy's flanks have been pretty severely exposed wherever I've deployed them. Meanwhile, we can see over here some Royal Hussars. There's also some Danelaw mailed swordsmen, which did actually return from routing. And I charged him in. I'm just trying to bottle up his Royal Hussars for as long as I can. You can actually see on one flank over here, I did actually win the cavalry engagement. My opponent's cavalry getting too close to my archers, so I do actually have my unit of Jarl's horsemen. So I do have a unit of cavalry now, which hopefully I will be able to use. And over here, where I won, I've got my infantry moving across. My opponent has one in the centre, but my Berserkers have been able to hold this fight down. Over here on the side we also have those Thane spearmen, but slowly but surely it looks like I'm going to gain the upper hand in this fight. My opponent was able to win in the centre, but he wasn't able to deal with my Berserkers quickly enough, and my Berserkers don't rout. So my Berserkers holding up all of the Royal Thanes for as long as I needed them to, and now reinforcements are on the way. My Northumbrian mailed Thanes, my Danelaw Hussars, and another unit of mailed Thanes. The cavalry's coming in, getting a nice charge here on, well, a decent charge. Admittedly my own units were kind of in the way there, but I do get a charge onto those Royal Thanes. Getting some nice hammer and anvil here could be all I need. I'm also sending his archers routing at this point. He does have a lot of Royal Hussars left alive though, and that's going to spell trouble for my Northumbrian mailed Thanes. Definitely not the sort of unit that I would be fighting in an ideal situation, but at this point I just need to bottle up his Hussars for as long as I possibly can. And I do have 2 units of archers as well over in the background over there. He's actually got some militia archers which return from routing. But it's still my Berserkers fight on. Near half of them are gone, but we're just hacking our way through the Royal Thanes. Getting a nice charge here onto what's left of his archers. Dealing with them with my Jarl's horsemen.
See, they flee before our might.
Starting to flee. You can actually see that his Thane spearmen over here have started to win. So yeah, he must have had the numbers advantage over here. Because I think my Northumbrian mailed Thanes under normal circumstances would win 1-to-1 with standard Thane spearmen. So he's actually winning on that flank now. So it is still a very close fight indeed. And he's still got some Royal Thanes over here. And you can see that this unit of Northumbrian mailed spearmen starting to get a bit surrounded now on all sides from infantry. Although amazingly, the Royal Huskarls have actually broken off. They're exhausted. Been fighting for too long. So now it's going to be up to my Berserkers and another unit of spears. This is really the infantry mosh pit which will decide the battle at this point. I think my opponent's trying to cycle charge with his Royal Huskarls, which is the only way he's going to win this, to be fair, because he needs to hack his way through my spearmen quickly and try and isolate my Berserkers, because the Berserkers are just so dangerous in a sustained fight. The Thane Spearmen and the Royal Bodyguard, that's why my opponent won that fight over there. My spears were no match for his Royal Bodyguard, but you can see that just in behind him, I am able to get my archers into the rear of his army. I'm also going to form up my Northumbrian mailed Thanes over here to sort of prevent reinforcements from coming. Because as long as my Berserkers are over in this fight over here, without support I will win that. So I'm just going to form a rear guard action over here with my Northumbrian mailed Thanes. And in the backs of these units I'm going to be firing my arrows. Their shields will not be in effect when they're pointing the wrong way. And they've already been in the fight for a long time against other spearmen. Let's have a look over here. My Berserkers still doing me proud. One of my units of Berserkers did fall away. But ultimately, I think the balance of power is tilting in my favour now. And with those arrows firing into the back of the enemy general, as soon as the enemy general falls, that should be a chain rout. Because Mercia just don't have the numbers left to deal with me, I don't think. And indeed, the Royal Bodyguard is starting to waver. And there we go. That was a chain rout. So, as we end the replay, let's have a look at the kills. So, clearly the thing which did the damage for me was my Berserkers. They were a real stalwart. They held up the middle. My opponent won in the middle, but when my Berserkers pushed in, they were able to tie up so many of those Royal Thanes that ultimately my opponent wasn't able to spread out, and I was able to close in on the flank where I was victorious with some spears and with some Huskarls, and ultimately that was enough to give me the victory. Where my opponent's army was good, of course you can see these Royal Huskarls here doing a good job. He had all of his Royal Huskarls on one flank, but ultimately that was the flank that I ended up winning. He moved his Huskarls to the middle a little bit too quickly, I think, because that was what ultimately allowed me to win that flank so significantly. Another thing that my opponent probably wishes he didn't do was bring so many cavalry, because ultimately his cavalry was destroyed, and in the late game you saw that I still had a unit of Jarl's horsemen, so technically speaking I won the cav fight with less resources invested into that area of my army. Which is always a bad thing when you find yourself losing a fight which you've invested more into. But it was pretty dicey. I mean, my Danelaw mailed swordsmen were no match for the Saxon Royal Thanes. And honestly, it was a very close fight, to be honest with you. All I had left was a unit of half-strength Berserkers and 2 units of fairly tattered Northumbrian mailed Thanes up here. My general got hacked to bits in the middle. I mean, he got overwhelmed by those Royal Thanes. Which is unfortunate for me. I lost my general quite early. It's fortunate that my Berserkers are unbreakable, so my opponent would have to fight for the victory there even after my general died. But yes, definitely a very interesting fight, very close fight as well. Hopefully I'll be able to do some more fights in Thrones of Britannia as well, some more varied fights as well, like a coastal battle with river landings and all sorts, and hopefully some sieges as well, because I do think there's a lot of potential in Thrones of Britannia. I'm enjoying myself a lot with the game so far, more than I thought I would actually. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you will join me for whatever is next.